today Sony released, well, they released a lot of stuff. So we got the all-new A7C II, which comes in at 33 megapixels, as well as the 61 megapixel A7CR. We also got a brand new 16 to 35 millimeter f2.8 G Master version 2. Welcome back, everyone. Today is Sony release day, which means two things. So first of all, we got two new cameras and a really nice lens. And second of all, I would be willing to bet that your YouTube feed is chock full of Sony videos. That's kind of how it rolls these days. But we do have some cool stuff to talk about. So let's talk about these C cameras. Some of you probably remember a few years ago when Sony released the A7C. The A7C was essentially a compact version of the A7 III, came in at a lower price point, and Sony were very excited about it. I was really excited about that camera too. I think it represented a new direction, a little bit of a departure from what we saw in the Sony lineup, and it's a different form factor for a camera, and I thought it was really cool. I was really excited to see where they were going to go with that. Well, today we can kind of see, because we've got the A7C version 2, as well as the A7CR, which is the high-resolution version. So in concept, the C stands for compact. This is the compact line. Unfortunately, C also stands for cheap. Well, cheaper in price, relatively speaking. They are not cheap in quality at all. Both bodies are very well built. They're pretty much exactly what you would expect from any Sony camera. But I've got some frustrations about both these cameras, and that's kind of what I want to get into this video. And it makes me sad because I actually really do like this new form factor. Both cameras come in very well spec'd, but there's just a few things in here that I think could be changed. And I'm not sure that the compact line needs to also be the cheap line. So when you look at the specs, the A7C II is essentially a light version of the A7 IV. The A7CR is a light version of the A7R V. So both cameras essentially have the same compact body design, and there's also a new grip that Sony has designed. Now the grip will come as an optional accessory if you have the A7C II. If you have the A7CR, it's going to come bundled with in the box. I actually really like the grip. Now, it's not a battery grip, so it's not massive. It's just going to extend the body slightly. It's very well designed. You can get to the battery compartment door very easily by just popping open the back of the grip, and it makes getting to the battery very accessible, but of course it is a compact design. So if you are using some kind of tripod plate, it could obstruct that door a little bit, but I do like the grip. It gives you just a little more to grab onto. Sony mainly designed this so when you're using some of the larger lenses, so for instance, the 135 millimeter G Master, some of the longer zooms, they tend to ride a little bit high on the body design and it becomes front heavy. And so it's nice to have the grip on there to grab onto. It just gives you just a little more space. I actually didn't think the grip made the camera a whole lot bigger, and I kept it on the entire time. I liked it quite a bit. So in terms of changes, the A7C Mark II got some upgrades from the A7 IV. So we've got an improved 7-step 5-axis image stabilization. There is real-time autofocusing now with AI processing. This is the same system you find in the A7R V. You have the ability for MLUT log recording with LUTs. You also have the AI auto framing for video. Now the A7CR is in many ways the same camera as the A7R V, except there are a few slight downgrades. So first of all, we have a slight downgrade with the image stabilization. Now it is the same 7-step image stabilization that you have in the A7C II, but that is a step lower than what you find in the A7R V. Continuous shooting is 8 frames a second compared to the 10 frames a second from the A7R V. There is no 8K video, but you do have the MLUT log recording with LUTs, as well as the AI auto framing for video. So there are a few slight differences from the models that these cameras are based on, but remember, these are the compact design. If you need those features, well, you have the other models to choose from. Both of these cameras come in at lower price points as well. Now, with lower price points, there is going to be a little bit of sacrifice and a little bit of trade-off. So what do we lose? Well, the bodies are obviously smaller, more compact, but probably more importantly, that's going to be a deal breaker for some, is we now only have single card slots instead of dual card slots, and there is also the dreaded EVF, which you've heard me talk about a lot. We'll get to that in a second. Another sacrifice in both of these bodies is going to be the design of the mechanical shutter. Now, this is probably not going to be an issue for most people. Sony have a single shutter curtain design that they use on their lower price point cameras. This makes a tremendous amount of sense from a manufacturing standpoint, and it's going to pass along savings to you as a customer. There were some issues with this type of setup early on. I found that they've all been resolved. I didn't have any problem with bokeh being cut off. off, or the circles being half circles or anything. It worked really well. My only gripe about this shutter system is that it's kind of loud. There's really no shutter dampening at all, and it's just a louder shutter than I'd like to have on a camera. I like, as a photographer, to be fairly stealth, and when you start having a lot of noises come off the camera, then people become camera aware if you're trying to shoot more improvisational things, more candids, and so that can be a problem for some people. That sort of was a problem for me. But other than that, I think the shutters are fine. But quite frankly, this probably deals more with the design of the body than it does the shutter, because I've noticed in general that the shutters don't get quiet on Sony cameras until you get into the more expensive models, and that's not where these are marketed at. So I've actually been shooting with the A7CR for about a month now, and I've actually been very impressed with this camera despite some of the shortcomings. I think in terms of feature set, I think Sony's included really the essentials of what you need. There are a few features that would be nice to have, and there are reasons to upgrade to the A7R V, but for instance, 8K video is not something that I shoot ever. 4K is as high as I go, and I know why they left it off because of heat issues. The other features are pretty negligible as well. I don't do a lot of high-speed shooting. If I were a high-speed shooter doing sports, things like that, I'd probably be looking at a dual-stack sensor camera anyway. So I think that a lot of the stuff that was left off, it was still very well thought out, and I like the smaller form factor, and that's what I keep coming around to on this, is that it's something new from Sony. I think that when you look at the wide range of cameras that we have out there from any manufacturer, when you get into full-frame mirrorless, I understand that there are differences in various brands and various models with ergonomics. They're slight, but we don't have any dramatic differences. And I love the fact that the C is something interesting. It's something cool. This goes for both the A7C II as well as the A7CR, but that's what I really like about this. Now, what I find frustrating about these cameras is there's a few features that are left off that should be better, and that I think the whole idea of the camera is to come in at that lower price point. And I'm sure there are financial people over at Sony that have looked at the market, they've analyzed it, and they said, well, if we come up with some lighter versions of some of our big cameras that sell, fewer people will be on the fence with the price point, and we would probably move those. But what they've done that I think is really cool as a result of all this is they have a new camera design. I personally would be willing to pay for more features on here that would make it a more professional camera at this smaller size. And let's start with that EVF. Now, the EVF is something that if you've watched my videos, you've heard me complain about before. It's the same EVF that comes on the APS-C cameras. I really do not understand this design at all. Now, for me personally, I don't think it's so much the resolution of the sensor, it's the eye point, it's the magnification. It's just so tiny to look into, and it is very frustrating to use for long stretches. Now, that being said, I don't want to make this the focal point of this review, because I got over it and I used the camera and I found enough that I liked about this camera to where it wasn't such a big deal. But I think at the price point that both these cameras come in, I think that the solution is, and I've said this before, this is my opinion, some don't agree with me, Sony has done this before with an external EVF. If you go back to the early mirrorless cameras, it wasn't a great resolution EVF, but for the cameras that didn't have one, you could plug it into the hot shoe and you could use that. I think Leica does the same thing really well with their M cameras. If you need that EVF for close focusing, then it's there. You've got it as an option. And I think something for the C cameras where you have more of a modular concept, where if you want that optional EVF, then you could add it into the system. That would be really cool to have. Another small complaint from me personally is the user interface. Now, I love the compact camera design. I think the button layout could be thought out just a little bit better, and we are, of course, missing a joystick, and that is a big deal. It's actually really unfortunate that that's not there. It's something that I use a lot. The custom function buttons, I know that's a very personal thing, and I do set mine up for very specific things, and I think other people probably do too. For instance, I was using a lot of manual focus lenses, and I like a button to be able to punch in for critical focus. I can do that, it's just slightly out of reach, and it would be a smoother experience if that were just a little more thought out in terms of the attention paid to the UI. And since I mentioned lenses, that's another issue, and I used a lot of manual focus lenses during my time with this camera. I got out my old Zeiss Loxia lenses, I got out my Voigtlander lenses, and the optics on them are all phenomenal. The main reason that I was shooting with those lenses is because of the compact camera design. They're small lenses, and they're very compact, they're very portable, they're very easy to use. Sony are making some of the best lenses that they've ever made in their system. The 50-1.4 is incredible, the 35-1.4 G Master, the 135 1.8 G Master, any of the zoom lenses. Sony are really making some fantastic optics. However, they all are fairly large in comparison with the C system. So one of the things that I would like to see moving forward is for Sony at some point to come out with a series of maybe, let's say, f2 primes that are a little bit smaller. I know it's more difficult when you're trying to incorporate an autofocus system and when you've got a lot of elements, because that's the design that Sony are using right now, but it makes sense. And if you look at companies like Leica that do that very well, they have their compact versions that are the f2 variety, and then you have your f1.4 variety that are much larger. I think we could use that in this instance. It's something that would make sense to go along with these camera bodies. However, I mentioned earlier, the whole idea with these is to come in at a lower price point, and I'm sitting here requesting features that are not lower price point at all. I realize that. And I think that's the most frustrating aspect about this camera is it's like, I don't want to have a camera that comes in at a lower price point because I'm going to sacrifice some things. I don't want an excuse to buy two bodies because one's a lower price point. I want a reason to buy the camera that works for me. And I'm serious, I think that the compact design on these is just so good. It makes you want to shoot on it, it makes you want to use it more, it makes you want to take it more places with you. There is definitely a place for these. I think from a business perspective, Sony and any other company, if they were to do the same thing, would do this as the customers are going to view smaller as equaling a lower price point. And I'm not sure I agree with that. I really want to see something that is just completely awesome in a different form factor. It makes it exciting. I'm obviously being a little bit critical here, and actually I probably will buy the A7CR. It's a really outstanding camera, minus a few little details, including that EVF, but I think that they've got something that's really special here that they're offering that, like I said, it's just different than anything else out there. I would really love to know what you think, so drop me a comment below. I will see you guys in the next video. Until then, later.